aren't taking the report seriously. In fact, when you talked about the report, you called a lot of the claims in the report hypothetical. Your direct quote was, although the report states that a hypothetical risk exists that returns could be selected unfairly, the draft report did not find any evidence that this has happened. But my colleagues here today have demonstrated real cases where the exempt organizations unit has targeted people based on their beliefs, and those cases were not hypothetical. This report shows that the IRS isn't documenting its decisions. And how can we tell if the targeting is happening or not if there is no documentation recording those decisions? There's no information to help us decide how decisions are being made at the IRS. In fact, just in fiscal year 2014, the GAO found that up to 34% of referral cases selected for audit were dismissed without a reason being documented. Isn't it possible that those cases received preferential treatment if they were dismissed? And 22% of the cases not selected for audit had no manager's signature approving the decision. So how do we know that those decisions weren't biased if we have no record as to how they were reviewed? So this is just over the course of 1 year and only 2 years after the IRS has admitted to targeting organizations. So you're saying that there's no evidence of wrongdoing, but you're also missing so many records and documents throughout the process that you can't prove that there wasn't any targeting being done. The burden of proof is on you and is on the IRS. So, Mr. McTeague, do you agree that lack of documentation means that possible targeting could still occur before the Commissioner speaks to some of what I have just talked about?
The lack of sufficient internal controls clearly opens the risk for potential abuses. I've said before that an effective internal control system provides reasonable assurance that misdeeds will not happen, but no internal control system is possible to create that will assure absolute adherence to any policies and procedures.
Commissioner,
I would just note that we take this report very seriously. I think it's a misrepresentation to say that we're not taking it seriously.
well, did you refer to the report as hypothetical?
Hypothetically, yes. At that point, there are risks, but the point was to make it clear that there hasn't been a case after the reviews. Nobody found existing bias or found cases. Much of the documentation, as Mr. McTeague said, was in a case file. There is a case file that was moved forward. Some of the documentation is there weren't sign-offs, and we need to make better procedures. We need to get better at this as I go. So the point is not that we're not taking it seriously. The point is we need to implement these recommendations, and we need to, as we go forward, continue to monitor and make sure that there is no, as Congressman Noem said, as minimal a risk as we can make. Nothing is guaranteed, but we need to make sure that the procedures work. Again, I would stress, when GAO interviewed employees involved in this process, across the board they found employees dedicated to, in fact, fairness, to making sure the system worked well and effectively, and that's my experience in the 14,000 employees I've met with. It's a dedicated workforce doing its best to deliver on the mission of providing taxpayer service and enforcing the tax code fairly.
But 2 years after the targeting scandal occurred, the burden of proof is on the IRS to show that they are not targeting organizations. And that is what disturbs me about the actions of the IRS since those 2 years have occurred, is that there is no processes in place to do that. Do you truly feel as though, I feel as though we're late coming to the party, because for 2 years now, the focus has been on the IRS, and it appears that you're not taking it seriously because no documentation processes have been put in place.
Yeah, the full report has several pages describing the existing protocols, procedures, and protections. So it's, again, not fair to say there are no rules, no procedures, no way to protect it, no documentation. The report's findings are important, but part of those findings are there is a significant process in place with detailed procedures and protocols. Including
documentation that shows how decisions are made.
And in the majority of the cases, vast majority, there is the appropriate documentation where, as Congressman Noem said, you haven't checked the boxes, you haven't provided the summaries, as Congressman Boland said, you've got to do that, and we need to do better at it. So I'm not saying it's a perfect process.
Specifically when auditing decisions are made, there is no, especially when auditing decisions are made, who gets audited, who doesn't get audited, how those decisions are made, manager signatures, that has not been done in the place, and will that be done in the future?
Yes, I'm saying we've already implemented some of these recommendations. We will implement all of them. But even beyond that, it's important for us here in a lot of places not to then rest on our laurels, as it were. We need to continue to be vigilant. We need to, in fact, I'm delighted to have GAO on a regular basis, as they do, and the Inspector General review all of this, because it is important for the public to feel that not only do we think we're doing a good job, but outside reviewers coming in have found that, in fact, we are performing as we've said we were going to perform. So quite the contrary, we take all of this as an important part of the process. It's why, as I said, I've been trying to encourage every employee, if ever they have a concern that something they feel uncomfortable about, something's not going the way it ought to, there are lines of communication outside of their immediate manager that they should use. They should view themselves as risk managers. And we will therefore, whenever there is a problem, my commitment is not that we won't have them. My commitment is we'll find them as quickly as we can, we'll be transparent about it, and we'll fix them quickly.
I would say, and I know I'm over my time, Mr. Chairman, but transparent would mean documenting how decisions are made, because you're accountable not just to Congress and to this committee, but you're accountable to the taxpayers that you're choosing to audit as well.
I think that's exactly right. We owe it to the taxpayers to be fair and to be clear. And taxpayers have a right, if they have a question, to ask us about it. If they're concerned, they can go to the taxpayer advocate, they can go to the Inspector General if they think that they somehow are being selected for an audit improperly. As I've said, we're going to do a lot of audits. They're going to cover the entire political spectrum. They're going to cover people who go to church, people who don't go to church, people who went to political rallies, people who never do. And the issue taxpayers have to be comfortable with is we're talking to them because of something in their return or something that should have been in their return, and that's the only reason.
Commissioner, the President gave an interesting interview where the IRS and the targeting and so forth came up, and it was within the past couple of days. And essentially he said